Welcome back to another edition of the I Prefer the 80s and 90s Sports Podcast, or editorial, a show where I talk about why I prefer the 80s and 90s sports over today. Today's topic that I don't like to talk about, but I'm going to bring it up. And hopefully never have to bring it up again. That topic is racism. Every day, I take surveys. And one survey that I see every day, and one question I'm asked daily, is the question about race relations in America today, whether or not they're being exploited by politicians, whether they exist, and whether the country is more racist today than 5 years ago. And all those questions I answer differently. Does racism exist today? It does. Are we more racist today than we were 5 years ago? No. Are all people racist? No. Do politicians exploit racism for their gain? Absolutely. In the sports world, racism is subtle. Racism is only there if you're looking for it. And I think I'm asked that question not enough, because I think that's the truth about every aspect of American society. Americans have this problem that I have. Americans' biggest problem is we live in the past when we should be living in the present. We don't forgive the past. We don't forget the past. But we need to stop living in the past. And the biggest reason why I don't stop living in the past is because the present constantly tries to remind me of the past. So when someone says to me, what I just said is, what I do, here's why I do that. First thing first. Yes, racism existed in the 80s and 90s sports world. Existed in American culture. But it was never pointed out as much as it is today. Every story, everything about American culture today has a racial angle to it, has an angle about society, has an angle about gender, has an angle about stuff that don't really matter to me, but it matters to this generation and this world. And so today, when Deion Sanders leads a team to a victory against TCU, Colorado fans are happy, but so are black people, because they say, here's a guy, got an opportunity to coach at a Power 5 school, went from an HBCU, which is historically black colleges and university school, got a chance in the big time, and they won. His son followed him. His son played today, threw for 500 yards, school record. Another player came with him, Travis Hunter, played both offense and defense for the whole game. And that's going to be celebrated as a huge thing in sports. But it's going to be celebrated a lot in the black community, because it's going to say, see, you give a black kid from the HBCU a chance to play, he and she can play. But here's the thing that bothers me about that. No one said they couldn't play. In the history of the NFL, there are HBCU grads who are Hall of Famers, some of which are world champions, some of which are noted as being the greatest football players ever to play. But the fact that they went to an HBCU is not highlighted enough for some, and therefore that becomes an issue. That becomes a topic of conversation that is held. Personally, today, I believe that most of the country was rooting hard against Colorado. Not because Deion Sanders is a black coach, but because of what Deion Sanders allegedly did at Colorado. And when he got the job, he basically said in a speech that the transfer portal will be available to most of you because I don't think some of y'all could play for me. And 57 kids transferred schools, 71 kids left the program. And so Deion did what any smart coach would do. He went to his home state, which happens to be the football hotbed in the country, which is the state of Florida. And Deion bought all these kids from Florida to Colorado, some kids from California, some transfers from other schools to join him at Colorado. And today they looked like a real football team and won the game. But my point is, in the 80s and 90s, we could care less. Now, people will say that's because there wasn't that many black coaches in the 80s and 90s in college sports. You're right. But Deion's not playing. He may have called some plays, but he's not playing. My overriding point is racism wasn't the issue in sports. And it shouldn't be an issue in sports today. Because if you turn the television on, all you see are black faces. Now, the issues that people have with all the black faces is what the black faces do. And what I mean by do, what I mean is how they perform on the field. Are they good citizens off the field? Are they jerks off the field and jerks on the field? But in the 80s and 90s, we loved the athletes. We cherished the athletes. And yes, the greatest player of all time, in some people's eyes, Jerry Rice, screamed racism when he wasn't voted Super Bowl MVP, or he was voted Super Bowl MVP, but Disneyland wanted Joe Montana. He had every right to scream it. But racism wasn't screamed very much in the 80s and 90s. Because in the 80s and 90s, a lot of people prospered in the 80s and 90s. Reaganomics was good for everybody. And yes, it was the beginning of some of the programs that exist today. Food stamps and a whole bunch of stuff. Medi-Cal, Medicare. Jimmy Carter left his office as president while America was in crisis. But I don't recall many black movements. I didn't recall movements of the HBTQ community. Because those issues existed then. But were not as important. Or not, that's the bad phrase to say. Just weren't brought to the forefront. But my point is today, I said that like 3 times, is watching this football game, all I kept thinking about was if Deion wins, everyone's going to say, well, we'll have an excuse. Brought this kid from Florida. TCU is not the same TCU as last year. Can't dispute that. And in watching the game, teams create turnovers. TCU turned the ball over. Deion's team turned the ball over once. TCU turned it over 3 times, part of the game. Nothing to do with race. But somehow, some way, that will get factored into the discussion. And it shouldn't. That's my point. In the 80s and 90s, you win. Nobody cares about you being black, white, green, or yellow. Today, you win. All of a sudden, it's a big win for the black community. It's a big win for this community. It's a victory for that community. Not impressed. Sports is sports.